How are we doing that back there? Thank you. Welcome back to Mustang Madness at the Petersen Automotive Museum. And what we're doing now is switching from stories about car guys and legacies and families of Ford to learning about classic car values and what goes into your classic car value, but also what you can do with your classic car once you get it. So we've assembled, as part of the Mustang Madness 50th anniversary celebration at the Petersen Automotive Museum, a panel of experts. Some of them I've spent a lot of time with, most I've known for many years in the classic car world. So let's start by bringing up our first expert, who happens to be from the home team here at the Petersen Automotive Museum, our marketing director, Chris Brown. Chris Brown, come on up. Chris has a very exciting background in that he is a transport design alum from Art Center. And what cars do you have a proclivity for, Mr. Hot Rod?
I've owned a couple of Mustangs.
Yeah.
I've owned a couple of Mustangs, done some design work on a few pretty hot custom ones. But you know, I love everything. So, and working at this place, you kind of have to love everything.
Absolutely. And Chris is going to be the one telling us about history and setting some context for Mustangs. There are things that you're going to learn from this man today that I promise you didn't know about your Mustang. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Big round of applause for Chris, please. Our next guest, I don't know how to quite put this. Our next guest, you know the term, the guy wrote the book? This isn't a figure of speech. This man literally writes the book on classic car values. He is the founder and publisher of the Hagerty Price Guide, and he is also the man responsible for me actually starting MotoMan 5 years ago, when he told me, you're going to wake up one day, be 50, and you're not going to know where your life went. Do something you're really passionate about. With that, Dave Kinney. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, MotoMan.
So what are you here to tell us about today?
Values and trends.
Values and trends.
We're going to talk about the Mustang, its place in the marketplace, kind of where it fits in and where it's going.
Are you going to give these nice people life advice as well?
Absolutely. I'm a life coach, as you know.
I found that out.
I'm just about to turn 60, so check with me in 2 years.
Oh, God. It was too much of a change last time. Welcome. Big round of applause for Dave Kinney. If anybody has seen the show over the past 4 or 5 years, you guys know that I'm a big aviation buff. My next guest, I found out, not only is a huge car guy, not only is a huge Mustang guy, but for 20 years, not only flew airplanes, he sold airplanes. Then he decided to give up aviation and come back down to earth, and now he is the consignment director at Mecum Auctions, and he's also on-camera talent for NBC Sports Network for every one of those auctions, John Kraman. Welcome, sir.
Well done.
Thank you for joining us all the way from Wisconsin. This guy came, actually Rockford, Illinois, but you commute to Wisconsin.
Correct.
So what are you going to be telling us today?
Well, first of all, let me just say I'm a huge Mustang fan and have been since I saw the first one back in 1965. But what we're going to be talking about here, what I'm going to be talking about, is specifically what we're seeing in the auction environment in regard to the Mustang market. I've got some real interesting stories and statistics to talk about.
I promise you, you are not going to want to miss the stats from this guy. Thank you for joining us. Big round of applause for John. And now last but not least, I promised you something different in a valuation seminar. I've been to this man's valuation seminars for what, 5, 10 years now?
Easily.
I've listened to you rattle off about values, and now we cry together that 288 GTOs are $1 million when we could have bought them for $100,000 many years ago.
If we had $100,000.
If we had, well, that's true. It's a good point. I forgot about that. My next guest, he is going to tell us about what to do with our classic cars once we have them. This guy, he is my Targa Newfoundland rally teammate. This guy has raced everything from ice racing, chump car racing, wheel to wheel. I'll just bring him up and he'll tell us when he starts his presentation. Rob Paccioni. This is the man that also gets the award for traveling the farthest to the Petersen. You come from very far, far land called?
Canada. I don't know if I should be proud about saying that given the circumstances right now, but that's where I'm from.
Okay, so we're looking to find out some more about racing vintage cars. Do you think you can tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think we can tell you a little bit about that. We're going to talk about how to get started racing a Mustang on a budget.
Okay, looking forward to it. And you've raced Mustangs before?
Once or twice.
Once or
Yep,
twice.
Yep, got a couple of cars that we've raced, yes,
Okay.
over the years.
And what was the biggest piece of advice you gave me when we first started rallying? What was that main line you gave us?
Keep a little change in your pocket.
Okay, we're going to learn what change in your pocket means, and it's not quarters. No. Or whatever monopoly money you have up there.
Loonies.
Okay. Have a seat. Big round of applause for Rod Paccioni. Okay, guys, and with that, what we're going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to each one of our panelists. They're going to give us a little bit of a presentation on each one of their topics. I'm going to ask you to hold the questions, give the cards to Marielle as your questions come up. She'll bring them to me, and I'll ask your questions at the end of each one of their presentations. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to the home team, Chris Brown.
Thank you, MotoMan.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No problem. All right, let's get this started. Okay, Ford Mustang, ponies for the people. Everybody here has an interest in Mustang, and the Mustang was developed from the get-go as a car for everybody to enjoy. So it gives you a little something for everybody. After America discovered the automobile and mass production began, you see the Model T here, everyone could afford a car, so cars became affordable to everybody. So everybody got a car. Not here in LA. This was a typical scene even back in the 20s here in Los Angeles. Soon motorists around the country learned to express themselves with their cars. They started getting unique vehicles. But not everyone could be as distinctive as they wanted to. Very few could afford to pay a coach builder to design a fantasy vehicle, much like what you see in here. All the cars in here are all coach-built town cars, and you'll see they're very unique vehicles. Well, that'll come to pass, and then it'll come back into our history again when we get to Mustang. Mass production made it more challenging to be an individual. As the cars came down the assembly line, they were not made to order as much as they were made to what the catalog said. After World War II, the baby boom began. As the baby boomers reached their teen years, they began to make more money than any generation of youth before them. And they were anxious to express their individuality, especially on the road. So a lot of customs became very popular in the 1950s. That's why you saw a lot of very wild custom vehicles. People wanted to express themselves. Not everybody had the time or the ability to modify their cars or pay to have a professional do the work. So Detroit recognized this trend, tested the market by offering a few tantalizing glimpses into the future. Of course, the crosstown rivals at GM were probably best known for that due to the Motorama shows that they put out with several concept cars in every show. But eventually, everybody got into the game. You see a wide variety of concepts. But meanwhile, these cars would have been perfect for wealthy, image-conscious executives. They weren't right for the market populated by the young and the youthful-thinking car buyers who might not have had such deep pockets but really wanted something that was personalized. Some cars were close to filling the need, but the ideal vehicle just hadn't quite been found yet. You had the Studebaker Avanti, of course, a classic Raymond Loewy design, but a little upscale. And then you have other cars like the Rambler, the Falcon, and the Corvair, which were more affordable but didn't quite offer the performance that the youth market was looking for. Ford tried many things before they hit on the right formula. You have the Allegro, which some of the styling actually made it into the production Mustang. You notice the grille kind of juts out in front of the headlamps, and the fastback profile kind of made its way to production Mustang. Of course, the Allegro 2 was a little bit more of a custom. The Cougar, sort of a 300 SL gull wing for the Ford market. Very pretty shape and a very beautiful car. The Avanti was more of a sketch from the Ford studios. And then Ford experimented with an extreme design that became the 1962 Mustang 1. But the Mustang 1 proved to be a false start, and the only things that led into the production version were the side scoops, the emblem, and the name. The rest of the car didn't quite meet what they needed. There wasn't any room in the American market for a tiny mid-engine roadster with a V4 and very little space inside the car. Only had room for two, no roof, of course, but a very radical and interesting idea. Then Lee Iacocca had a little bit better idea. He recognized that Ford had an advantage most other manufacturers did not, and that was a platform upon which to base something very special. So his team went about transforming the workaday 1963 Falcon into the 63 Mustang II, a concept car that was created to excite the public about the soon-to-be-released production car. Now, this car actually started development after they figured out what the production car was going to be, but as is common today with concepts, they wanted to warm the public up to what the Mustang was going to be because they knew they couldn't make it like the Mustang 1. So you have a few of the styling cues of the first Mustang, like that scoop in the side of the car and the very angular nose, the colors, a lot of similarities, but still similar to the production car. It started with a rendering, which of course then led to a clay and a fully trimmed mock-up. Very pretty car, a very functional vehicle. Looked good from any angle. That kind of chopped roof really gave it a very rakish profile. And of course the front end came to a point much like the Mustang 1 concept. The inside was a little bit more radical than the production version, but still very similar. The reaction was universally positive, and Ford unveiled the production car at the 1964 New York World's Fair.
Thank you.
The first generation of cars from 65 to 73 went through quite a few updates. In fact, some of them are so far from the original concept that we wonder how they were still the same car. Underneath, they were still Falcon. The 67 update, of course, was just a little bit bolder styling of the original car. In 69, they added a second set of headlamps to the grille and a little bit longer front end, a little bit more graceful profile to the roof when it came to the fastbacks. But then in 71, the car grew to its largest proportions. A very large car, very streamlined automobile, but you notice almost all of the hallmark Mustang details have kind of evolved into something else or disappeared. They brought that back. The car actually kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. They brought that back in the second generation, the 74 to 78 Mustang II. And while maybe not quite as popular of a car, a lot of the Mustang styling cues ended up back in that car. You notice the grille has a familiar shape that juts out ahead of the headlamps with the inset parking lamps. It has the horse in the center of the grille, which is a little hard to see in the slide. The C-shaped scoop on the side of the car and 6 tail lamps. So the car really kind of brought back a lot of those styling cues from the first one and was really a product of course, the oil embargo and just the safety and insurance issues that we were going through in the 1970s. T-tops replaced convertibles. Convertibles kind of were seen as something that was going to disappear forever. Around 1976, convertibles had completely disappeared from cars due to rollover standards that the government brought out, and a T-top gave that a little extra strength. Of course, it wasn't a very well-remembered car. Unfortunately, a lot of the Mustang IIs have kind of ended up here. The third generation, the Fox body, came out in 79, and it was a very modern-looking car, totally new approach, totally fresh, clean sheet styling on this car. And the convertible, it came back in 1983. Of course, when they came around to the 1994, the fourth generation, they wanted to bring back that Mustang DNA. So they brought the horse back to the grille, they brought the C-shaped scoops back to the side, and the taillights had 6 elements to them. Of course, the fifth generation, a lot of people call retro because it has a lot of that original styling in the car. It's very recognizable. Everybody knows that's a Mustang. Of course, drum roll, please. The new car, the 6th generation, 2015 and beyond, goes away again from the retro styling and pushes the car in a new direction. But at the same point, there's a few little styling cues in there to let you know it's a Mustang. You have the grille that forms a corral around that beautiful Mustang emblem. You look at the headlights, and they have three little hash marks that actually light up. That's a detail that goes all the way back to the very first series of Mustang. And even the sculpturing on the side of the car, while it doesn't form that C shape, there are three distinct surfaces that, if you kind of squint and look at it, gives that sort of C-shaped shape to it. It also has the 6 tail lamps again. So it's coming back full circle, but with an entirely new look.
Thank you, sir. Chris?
Thank you.
Coming from the man that literally learned transport design just up the road here at Pasadena. Is my mic on? Okay, from Art Center College of Design, and you used to work with Chip Foose and Boyd Coddington, correct?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Very
One of
well.
his cars is down in the basement.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you again, Chris. So a lot of you guys know about Hagerty Insurance, and this is not a commercial for Hagerty at all, but here's an interesting little tidbit of information. Classic car values, if you think about it, everyone kind of wants to know about what are transaction prices, what does a Mustang sell for, like what does a 429 Boss sell for, what does a new Cobra R sell for. Well, Hagerty has a unique vantage point here in that they're the largest classic car insurer, so they get to see what people are actually buying the cars for and what they're insuring the cars for, and they follow auction results. So with that, I'm going to bring up Dave, who's going to share trends about those data points. Dave?
Thank you. I want to thank all of you for attending here today. This is really a thrill to see all these Mustangs and meet all these Mustang people. It's been a lot of fun. I've been associated with Mustangs all my life. My mother had one in 1965, my brother had one in 1966, and it was the car my sister and I shared in 1970 through whatever in high school years. So I've been around Mustangs pretty much since the beginning. Wanted to talk to you about what we call values and trends with Mustangs. Our first slide here is the collectible muscle car guide. This doesn't just include Mustangs. You can see the Mustangs highlighted in here. But this is what happened in 2008. You can see with the general economic crash, the value of muscle cars was hit pretty substantially. Now, one of the cars that got hit along with the muscle cars that I never agreed was the Shelby. I always thought the Shelby was a part of the muscle car market, but it was separate from the muscle car market. That's represented some real buying opportunities in the marketplace. Now the index is up 27% since 2009, the low point 2008, 2009. Shelby GT350 up 89% since 2009, so that's a lot of growth. 69 Mustang Boss 429 is up 8% since 2009. Another good group of growth there. This is our pony car index. It is also up 24% since 2009, but Mustangs are unchanged. That's good news and bad news. Mustangs didn't take a big hit. They weren't in that muscle car market, they were in the pony car market. A lot of the growth has been in some of the high-powered General Motors cars, and in all fairness, this is heavily weighted on the first generation of Mustang, so I wouldn't worry too much about that number there. One of the cars I wanted to drill down on a little bit, the GT350H, a car most all of us know. Here's the numbers on this car as what we've seen in the past few years. You can see that, well, for a few things, the car has pretty low build numbers. It's a well-known story in the classic car marketplace. It's a well-known story among obviously all of you, the Hertz, Shelby, Mustang connection. And also, whenever I talk about this, those cars are very easily faked, but there's also a registry, so don't buy one off of Craigslist for $800. It's not going to be a real car. And then we also have a supercharger ad, but you can see that graph there. Now the green line up at the top represents the number 1 condition cars, the yellow is the number 2, the blue is the number 3, and the red is the number 4 condition cars, the ones being the top cars. Number 4 cars are still pretty good cars, but they're not anywhere near as nice as the number 1s. They're cars that have been driven quite a bit or have been used or left out to weather. Fox Platform Mustang. This really has the most potential for growth across the board in terms of value. They made lots and lots and lots and lots of Fox Platform Mustangs. You can see what we've got here is a 5-liter from '87. This car, and you should really concentrate on the top part of that graph because this is for a really nice car. What's happened in our marketplace, in the classic car marketplace, more and more people are just saying, you know, even at these numbers, I'd rather spend more to get the right one than to buy one and fix it up. So you have, if you think of it as a funnel, at the top of the funnel, more people are interested, and as the funnel goes down, you get less people interested in buying a collector car. Something to keep in mind when you're looking at a collector car, pardon me, because sometimes the cost of restoring can be so incredibly high. And with a less expensive collector car, you know, those fenders, that air conditioner, all those things that you want to replace on your car, they're still quite expensive unless you can find them used or you can do the work yourself. Of course, we've broken out into different years, but the marketplace is broken out into the quad light and the aero look. Like I said before, just an unbelievable choice of cars. You've got everything, you know, every body style, pretty much everything out there for those cars. So you basically have something for everyone. Nice examples are becoming rare. These cars were cheap. They went from the new car market to the used car market and are only now growing into the collector car market. That's real important because there's some cars that go, a Ford GT, perfect example. It was a new car, it was never a used car, it went right to the collector car market, and Ford GTs have gone up in value tremendously since 2005, 2006 when they were new. Very rare for something like that to happen. They're affordable, the Fox body cars are affordable, they're fun, and they are appreciating. Buy the better car. That's the advice, just buy the better car when you can. One of my personal favorites is the Shelby GT Hertz car, the H. People criticize it for its ride quality. I've rented them, I've never owned one. I just love the look. It's a great tribute look. I think this car is going to be more important as in the marketplace as years go on, and it's one of my picks. 2006 the coupe, 2007 convertible. I say it's a can't miss car if bought right. What I say if bought right, that just doesn't mean a cheap one, it means get a good one. Some of these cars have histories. Used car dealers call them stories. Most stories are bad. Every once in a while you'll find a good story, but if you hear a lot of stories around a car, it's probably not a good thing. You know, it was a great car until the big flood. Is not something you really want to hear. They've shown really nice appreciation in the last 5 years. I'm sure John knows more about these because he sees them in the auction venue all the time. It's a tribute. It's got tribute looks with new car features. Now, what does that mean? It really means the air conditioning works. All of us who've owned a '65 Mustang know that it's the equivalent of a mouse blowing air over a ice cube when it comes down to cooling the car sometimes. These cars have a lot of modern amenities, which is nice if you're going to drive the car more than just a Saturday or Sunday driver or an occasional used car. And then the other thing is you have to put up with the you bought a used rental car for how much? That's a question that you might get, but it's also fun to talk about. Now, we've already stolen some of the thunder from the second generation cars, the Mustang 2s. This is a Cobra 2. I just wanted to point this car out because I just love this story. This car is recently at an auction. It recently sold. It brought $19,000. That's for a Mustang 2. That's big money. But the great part is it's big money for a Mustang 2, but it's not big money for a collector Mustang. Now, I personally am waiting for the right King Cobra to come by to see what that sells for, because the King Cobra is the boss of the Cobra 2, and it's a great car. And, you know, from the era, you're going to show up at a car show with a Mustang 2, And you're going to have 5 guys there with Mustang 2s, and a lot of guys with earlier cars and a lot of guys with later cars. So it's kind of an exclusive club that you can join for cheap money, which is really, really fun. And all of us have seen the Mustang 2 that Petersen has. They just found that car recently, and it was $2,800. It's pretty much a base car, but it was a really nice car. Bought on Craigslist.
Yes,
right?
from Palm Springs.
From Palm Springs.
I was just going to say, I've got a car to sell you for 19 grand, but you already gave it away.
I was born tonight, but it wasn't last night.
I got a bridge to
yeah,
sell
there
you.
you go. So we've got a well-documented example in the marketplace, and more than that. And I think, once again, John will have better examples. This is one of my favorite cars that sold in the last couple of months. A summer edition Mustang with 50 miles. And this is just drilling down on an 82 Mustang 5-liter. You can see how the prices are going up on these, especially for the nice cars. And I can't emphasize that enough. You see that red line down there? That's the condition 4. The blue line is condition 3. Condition 3 is still a great driver car. Don't get me wrong. Don't be embarrassed about buying or owning a condition 3. But look what's happening to the 2s and the 1s especially. That car, the slide I just showed you, a 50-mile car sold for $24,200. I think that's a bargain. It's a brand new car. You're going to win an award at some Mustang show if you want to have it, because there's not going to be a nicer one. The spring edition and summer edition cars, kind of fun to have. It's a great story. It's a Mustang kind of continuum that they've had those for a long time. And that was a 5-liter car. And it really was as new. I mean, I wish I could blow up the shot of the interior, but that's a car that, there haven't been too many people sitting in that car since the day it was born. Cobra R. Rob and I have been doing the talk here and taking people around. Cobra R is another one of my favorite cars. It's eclipsed in power by a lot of cars. Its styling is very dramatic. Car was built, the R stands for race. It was a showroom racer basically when new, but a great car to take a look at, especially if you take a look at that number right there. That's what's been happening in just the last couple of years. The Cobra Rs went way down. They started up, they went up even further, then they went way down. And there's lots of examples out there that are still brand new cars. So you can see the charts are rising on every condition, but especially on the number 1 condition cars. I think this is a buy now car. If you're thinking of buying one, I think it's the kind of the sweet spot in the marketplace. That's just what our research shows me, but I'm kind of prejudiced because I like the cars as well. Gen 4 cars, the SN95, most are all used cars. They're not all collector cars yet. That's a great timeline, a great time in the market, I think. Talk about value trends. You want to buy low and sell high. Sometimes I do it differently. I do the other way. My wife is happy to remind me of that. But when you can buy cars, and there's always this wonderful sweet spot, you buy them from a seller who's selling a used car, but it's a collector car, and you put it into the collector car marketplace. So maybe it's a car you buy and drive for 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, something like that, and enjoy, and then you're going to sell it to a fellow collector. So the used cars are generally, when the delineation comes, the lesser cars stay in the used car market. They get crashed and taken away from the marketplace, but the collectors know to buy the parts, to get the stuff that they need, and to buy the right one right now. And I say it's a sweet spot time for those right now. Like you said before, there are many, many, many interesting special editions. My favorite of the whole bunch is the Bullet cars, the Mach 1s out there, the Spring Feature Edition, and more and more and more and more. Bullet cars, I say, are bulletproof buys, once again, if bought right. They are just an excellent tribute to a car with a great story. The story of Steve McQueen, a magic name in the collector automotive business. So MotoMan, that's what I have.
Thank you, sir. I forgot, before you sit down, I forgot one thing about your introduction. Car girls in the audience, raise your hand. Car girls in the audience, I got one there, I got one there. How many times do you give your husband, boyfriend, whoever, crap for, or actually vice versa, losing keys? You ever guys lose keys? Never lose keys? Never lose keys? No? You never lose keys? Well, Dave, he used to give his wife a lot of crap about losing keys. Yeah. What did you lose?
I lost a 1963 Studebaker Avani.
A whole car.
Car number 2.
Yeah.
But I found it.
But you found it.
I found it.
15 years later.
15 years later, and I point out to my wife when she brings this up, I paid less to get the car back than I would have paid in storage.
And with that, you can sit down. So another extreme case of a Mustang car guy, John Kraman, come up and join us here. You have traveled to California, correct?
Yes.
Yes. So you didn't drive here,
You
correct?
know, I'm here. I'm really honestly here.
You really are here. You
Yeah.
traveled here, right?
Yeah, traveled here, American Airlines.
American Airlines, yes. So tell us what car you drove here in.
Well, I've had really good success over the past 3-4 years, kind of finagling and sweet-talking my way into Mustang rental cars. And I was able to do that here on this trip. I had the choice of a Ford Expedition, which is fine, a Chevy Impala, but I went in and asked for a Mustang, and the good folks at Avis were able to accommodate me.
And with that dedication,
Thank you.
the wand is yours.
Hi there. We're going to kind of shift gears a little bit here.
Literally.
A lot of what I'm going to talk about is going to be very similar to the data that Dave has just put out. And it's interesting because we had no previous correlation. He put together his data, and I put together my data. And I think what you're going to find are some real interesting statistics. We're going to start with these numbers here, and I want to make it crystal clear. These are not production numbers. These are the amount of Ford Mustangs of the first generation that we have seen at Mecum Auctions since 1968, or since 2008, broken down by the year of the first generation cars. You'll note that 2,401 Mustangs have crossed the Mecum auction block since 2008. I will go advance a little bit of the payoff at the end. We're going to talk about all the generations of the cars at a Mecum auction and break it down to a percentage basis, but the Generation 1 cars definitely by far and away are the most popular cars on the auction scene. Generation 2 cars, the Mustang II, 1974 to 1968, completely different story. You know, the Mustang II was such an important car at the time. It was the car that really saved the Mustang. The pony cars, the long hood, short deck, sporty cars that virtually all the manufacturers were had on the market. The Javelin, the AMX, the Challenger, the Barracuda, the Cougar, of course the Mustang, the Firebird, the Camaro. All those cars were quite popular in the 1960s when the Mustang really launched the pony car movement, but really started to lose a lot of steam in the early 1970s. It was this car, the Mustang II, which was the right car at the right time based on a Pinto platform. Sales were outrageous. Almost 400,000 Mustang IIs were sold in 1974 alone. Guess how many we've seen at a Mecum auction since 2008? You'll see that the number is 0. In fact, during the whole production run, almost 1 million of these Mustangs were built. During this production run, we've only seen 7 of them at auction. In 1978, 3 of them, and all of those happen to be Cobras. So I'm going to call, with no disrespect to the importance of the Mustang II, it's the forgotten Mustang, and from an auction environment, it's also statistically insignificant. Things start to improve a little bit with the fox-bodied Mustang. This was the car where Ford said, you know, we weathered some tough times in the car business, and it's during the 1970s, and let's generate some excitement back in the Mustang line. This is the generation of Mustang that was in production the longest of any of the current 5 generation segments. And you can see that the numbers now start to improve. Cars that we see at auction, which might also be defined as Mustangs that we consider collectible, still quite a bit less than we saw with the first gen cars, but definitely a step in the right direction. Mustangs were starting to come back. SN60 or SN95 cars from the 4th gen, sharing a lot of the platform with the Fox body cars, but enough improvements to the exterior design of the car and also to the mechanicals, and a lot more horsepower starting to come in as the years started to come up as well. Again, we're starting to see some numbers at the Mecum auctions. And it's really, if you go further into the data, you'll see that it's a lot of the special edition cars, the Cobras, the Cobra Rs, the Mach 1s in particular. Those cars were collectible when they were brand new. They were expensive compared to a base Mustang or a base Mustang GT. They took a little bit of a depreciation curve after they left the showrooms. That's kind of flattened out now, and they're starting to come on strong. And I think that that's really good news, because what it shows is that there's interest in Mustangs in all generation levels. It's not just first generation cars or S197 platforms or any of the different Mustang generations. This is a car that is more than just an important car for Americans, and it's more than just the American icon for the past 50 years. It is the American icon, period, end of story. And I think that the interest level that we see, not only here at events like this, and that we see on the auction environment, I think really proves that. 50 years of Mustangs, we're gonna see another 50 years, I have no doubt about that at all. Final data I have is maybe some of the most surprising of all. Current generation Mustang, S197 is what the platform is called. Look at how many of what are considered to be late model cars are crossing the Mecum auction block. Now, some of those cars, of course, included in there are Shelby GT500s, which in their debut in 2007 were almost considered instant collectibles. You know, a lot of people that are Shelby enthusiasts felt like they were a little bit deceived, because they thought that it was going to be a short production run, that the 2007, maybe even a 2008 GT500 was going to be all that Ford did. Well, as we know, a couple things have happened. Number one, the car is still in production today. You can buy a brand new 2014 GT500, and not only that, it's jumped in horsepower from its debut in 07 at 500 horsepower all the way to today's version, 662 horsepower, 200 mile per hour top speed. My main comment about the current generation Mustang is that's the one to have. We don't know yet. We've got some good information today about the 2015 Mustang, but what we do not know is from a performance standpoint, where is that car going to go? Are we ever going to see performance levels like we currently have with the S197 platform? We don't know the answer to that. There's a lot of speculation, but we do know this today. The GT500 is available. It is a monster from a performance standpoint. I'm sure some of you in this room have the car, and we are seeing a little bit of action in the auction environment on these relatively late model cars. Kind of a surprising number. To bring it all up to sort of the bottom line, this is the bottom line. 2,000 or 3,226 Mustangs crossing the auction block. 74% Generation 1 cars. Generation 2, insignificant, and then pretty equally spread between the remaining 3 generation cars. I find that to be a particularly fascinating number, because it does show that there is interest in an auction environment to collectors on really Mustangs of all generation, except for the one glaring exception, that Generation 2 car, the Mustang 2. And I don't know if it's a story that's been told, a quick Mustang 2 story. The museum, for their display here, they wanted a Mustang 2, and they searched high and low to find one, and they actually, to have one on loan, they actually had to go out and find one. They had such difficulty finding a car, and they were very lucky to obtain the 1974 Mustang 2 for the collection that we've all had a chance to look at. There are many Mustang enthusiasts that have never even, relatively young guys, that have never even seen a Mustang 2 in person. So where it's going to go, Dave talked about, of course, the Cobra and the King Cobra, you know, a couple of them bringing really strong money, maybe even knocking on the $20,000 door. Yeah, I think if you've got a performance version of a Mustang 2, and they were actually built with a 4-speed and a 302 as well. 4-speed was available late in the Mustang 2 production run. A really good low mileage example is probably a car that is going to be sought after for Mustang collectors, but right now it's a forgotten Mustang, and they are just not out there. I'm going to, just for the second half of my presentation, compare the numbers. I've taken some data on some relatively popular Mustangs that would have sold back in 2008 or 2009, kind of being the low point of the Mustang values in the modern environment due to the economic collapse that affected everything from real estate all the way to collector cars. The first example here is what's happening currently with the first generation cars, specifically fastbacks, which have just all of a sudden burst out of the scene. You know, the convertibles in the first gen cars have always gotten the most attention, and then the fastbacks, and then of course the base coupes. But in recent times, over the past couple years, the fastbacks have come roaring out of that mid-pack and are going value-wise head-to-head with the convertibles now. And of course, the top of that heap, the K code, the 271 horse Hypo 289, with a couple of really great examples here. A pristine restored example back in '08 sold for $45,000. That was a lot of money back in 2008 for that Mustang. But hold on to your hats. Recently, last year, 2013, almost double the value, $91,000 paid for a K code 2+2. That's an astonishing number. We're not going to see in some other comparisons I have that much of an appreciation in value, but I really think it really shows a couple of things. It shows what's happened with the getting close to the 50th anniversary of the Mustang that we're at right now, and how important these cars have come to collectors, maybe even outside of the traditional Mustang market. Keep in mind, those of us that have been Mustang fans for a long time remember when these cars could be bought off used car lots in really good condition for $1,000 or $2,000. We're nostalgia buyers. We think about these kind of monies for cars that were sold for $3,500, $4,000 brand new back in the 60s, and then in the 70s, half that value as used cars. We have a hard time kind of getting our arms wrapped around these kind of numbers. But the reality is the nostalgia buyer, a different generation of buyer that maybe weren't there to remember that, but understand how important these cars are to the and their effect on the launch of the popularity of the Mustang. This is the transition in the market, and this is what's happening with really important cars. That may be an extreme example and not typical, but I thought it was a good example really to show everybody what one particular Mustang segment has come roaring out of nowhere, and I think for very good reason. This is a really good one because this is what Dave talked about during his presentation. Boss 429 Mustang, really considered to be the absolute value king and the King Kong value-wise of production Mustangs. Even more than a Shelby of the same year, which is almost astonishing. We put Shelbys on such a high level of desirability and image and performance, but the reality is it's the '69 first year Boss 429 that brings the big money. Check out what happened to a black one here, a very nice car, sold for $275,000 back in 2008. A car in similar condition, only in red, equally as popular as a color, has recently sold this year for $260,000. It shows a very predictable and a very stable value in the collector car environment. And I will tell you that's not necessarily a bad thing, because what it shows for somebody that wants to start collecting cars or buy one of these cars, it does clearly show that you can establish a baseline on a price and you kind of know what they're worth. If you're interested in buying one, you know you're not going to buy a beautifully restored Boss 429 for $100,000 or $150,000. It's not going to happen. Nor will you have to spend $400,000 or $500,000 for one. There's enough sales and enough transactions to really set the market. And that's what's happened with the Boss 429. Another interesting example, the affordable Mustang. Dave hit on it as well. The Fox-bodied Mustang. It's considered to be the entry-level Mustang. It was the longest production run of any Mustang platform, and probably will always hold that record. There were over 1 million of these cars built. There's still a lot of them on the road today, but they bring used car prices. Moral to this story is the market is stable and the market still is very affordable. Just a little bit of a bump in price over the past 3 years. These are for 5-speed, 5-liter Mustang GT coupes. In the collector car world, that is literal pocket change. So I really looked through a lot of the data on the Fox Mustangs to come up with a really good example of what can happen, what you can do in the collector car market without breaking the bank. And a Fox-bodied 5-liter Mustang definitely is the best value. SN95 cars, the 4th generation cars. There are a lot of extreme examples of versions of these cars. Some of them from the tuners, the modifiers. In this particular case, what I've done is I've selected a couple of cars from the guys up at Rouse, their Stage 3 package. Back in 2008, one just brought a few ticks under $20,000. The same car in a different color in similar condition, look what's happening to the price of it. It's gone up over $5,000. And I think that that's interesting to note a couple of things. And that is these tuner cars, whether they're Shelbys or whether they're Roushes or whether they're Salines, doesn't matter who it is. They're expensive when they're new. They take a pretty good depreciation curve after a couple of years. They bottom out, and guess what starts to happen over a period of time? They start to go back up in value again. And just like Dave said, it's all dependent on condition. You can't take a 70, 80,000 mile car that's beat up and expect it to fetch these kind of numbers. Fair weather driven, reasonably low miles, which I would put no more than 5,000 miles per year, and an extreme unmodified stock condition that literally still look like a brand new car will continue to have, in my opinion, will continue to have this type of appreciation. That's some interesting data I found is doing a little bit of research about what was happening within the auction environment with Mecum, and I really think it's representative not only as it was happening with us as an auction company, but with other auction companies as well, and probably what's happening with private sales. Mustangs will always continue to be, you know, it's America's sweetheart car. There are some other big significant cars. The Chevrolet Corvette's probably a real good parallel, but the reality is that's a different car that appeals to a different class and at a different affordability level. The Mustang is obtainable in a collectible Mustang for any potential buyer, and that was the point I wanted to share with you folks today.
Thank you, sir. So a real quick question I find interesting. We saw on Dave's charts like some downward and then upward through that same time period. In the big value car, the 429, did that ever go down?
No, and that's what was interesting, you know, with the 429 is it's remained surprisingly stable, and it's an important car, and quite a few of them change hands. It has remained relatively stable in value, and that's not that unusual for what I would say to be as investment grade cars. Another good example in the Ford camp would be the Ford Cobra, the AC Cobra, you know, the Shelby. That's a car that even when the market went south, didn't see some real big dips. It stayed pretty stable because it really is such an important car, and I think the Boss 429 shares that same thing. The everyman's cars, the bulk of the collector cars saw a pretty substantial drop in value between the mid-2000s and the end of 2000s, maybe as much as 25 to 40% in value. We didn't see that drop in value with the Boss 9s. That's why you see it a little bit more of a flat line.
Do you see that car doing the hockey stick like the Cobra's done? And the GT350 for that
Yeah,
matter?
that's a great question. That's the question everybody's asking right now. Frankly, there was a Boss 429 that was sold at our auction that brought just a few ticks with a buy fee under $600,000. And I didn't use that car as an example because
when did that happen?
That was last year. It was at Monterey of 2013. And the reason I didn't mention, and I'm glad you brought it up, is because that car had less than 1,000 original miles. It was fully documented. It looked literally like a brand new car and is believed to be the absolute best example of a Boss 429 in original condition on the planet.
Wow.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, the Boss 429s, they are the #1 Mustang desirability and value in the Mustang food chain.
All right. Well, thank you, John.
Thanks, Ron.
Big round of applause for John. So no offense to these guys, but I am very excited to hear from Mr. Paccioni here. Mr. Paccioni, we talked all about where the car came from. We talked about the trend in the market. We talked about some very specific examples. Now we're going to talk about, okay, so you just wrote a $600,000 check for a 1,000-mile car. Now it's idiots like me and Rob that would take that car and do 5 days in Newfoundland, Canada, and just beat the crap out of it, but have a great time doing it. Rob, come on up. What can we do in vintage racing?
You can do pretty much anything. I've been racing cars for about 20 years now, different makes, different kinds of cars in different venues.
Bring the mic up a little bit.
Oh,
so we can hear
sorry.
you. Yeah, we want to hear what you have to say from Canada.
Of course you do.
All the way from Canada.
As I said, I've raced different cars over the years, and the car that got me started, the car that I've raced the most, that I've had the most success with, is a Mustang. So I'm going to talk about how to get started.
I also want to point out, this is the only man that in this room probably that has literally flown a Mustang on all four wheels. You can see, go back to your last slide there. Look at this here. Literally, that is Rob flying a Mustang.
The roads in Newfoundland aren't like the roads here. You pretty much don't know what you're getting into. And yes, we have flown, and on YouTube I've flown one off a cliff too. The best way to get started, in my opinion, is with a Fox body or an SN95 car. Reason being, these cars, as the gentleman before me said, are the most readily available. That platform has been in existence for over 25 years. You'll see a Fox body on the left, the red car, and that's actually our Targa Newfoundland car, the one on the right. The reason being, these cars are relatively inexpensive. It's a great car to start with. It's a very versatile platform. You can race them in rallies, as we've done, road racing, CCA, any type of event like that. The other advantage is that the availability of parts for these cars is enormous. You have Mustang-specific wrecking yards, you have eBay, you have an infinite source of parts for these cars, which makes it a great car for grassroots level racing. Before you do anything to your car, you need to pick your driving style. This is going to dictate the level of preparation that you need. The first type is a lapping day. Pretty much any street car can go lapping. The safety requirements are minimal. Usually anything that gets you on the road safety-wise will be allowed on a lapping day. The next level of driving and preparation is either Solo One, autocross, or time attack. These are events that typically you're not racing against another car per se, but you're racing on a track by yourself against the clock. These require a little bit more preparation, at least a 4-point roll bar, safety harness, which are the racing seat belts, a 4 or 5-point harness, and typically a racing seat. The cars are classed according to the level of modification. So, for example, if you have a stock car, you're going to be racing against another stock car. You'll also have classes pitted against like street tires versus a competition tire. Road racing is a whole different animal. That requires a huge level of preparation and a huge level of safety. We're going to talk about that.
I can vouch for that.
Yes, you can.
Yes.
You want to start with the best rust-free, clean shell you can. This is the car we started with in our Targa Newfoundland car. That was essentially a body in white. It was a car from Ford that was never used, and it makes for a good starting point. The stronger the platform, the more rigid the car, the better the handling car you'll have. It'll be stiffer. You don't want to start with a clapped out shell from a wrecking yard because you're doomed to failure right from the beginning. These are typical examples of roll cages. The first one, a 4-point, is what you'd see in a Solo One car. The word point means how many attachments the roll bar has to the chassis of the car. The furthest to the right is an 8-point cage. Typically with showroom stock or sedan racing, you're going to have an 8-point or even a 10-point, 12-point cage, kind of like what you see in NASCAR. NASCAR's is like a virtual cocoon around the driver. Because the Mustang is over 2,500 pounds, you need to use a pretty robust steel cage for safety.
Rob, a quick question for you. Will any of the OEM, not the cages, but you know the hoop bars you see in some convertibles or like in the Laguna Seca, will those bars work in some of these things?
Absolutely not enough. I mean, I'm not going to speak to the engineers from Ford, but they're more for a cosmetic purpose than.
But in terms
than
of getting you on the
structure.
track, would the scrutineers let you on?
Absolutely not. Absolutely. Well, it depends. For lapping days, you can go with a minivan on a lapping day. They don't care. But
We know
for
somebody
any
who did
kind
that.
of yes, we did actually. For any kind of serious racing, they're going to require a substantial cage, and not only they require it, you should have it because at the end of the day, we all want to go to work the next day. Again, the Mustang is typically a car that's over 2,500 pounds, even in race trim. So you have to use a substantial steel cage to pass safety specifications. What I've listed here is the steel used in the Mustang. It's a 1 3/4 inch DOM steel and 1/8 of an inch wall thickness. DOM means drawn over mandrel. And what that means is that the tubing is of uniform thickness all the way through the bend. You need that for strength, rigidity, and structure. Typically, if you see when you see a muffler or a tailpipe that's bent, you'll see kinks in the bend. That weakens the steel. You can't have that in a roll cage in a race car.
And what is the cost difference between that 8-point and that the one for the lapping? How much is the difference in price?
Typically, you can buy a prefabricated 4-point roll cage for pretty much any car, anywhere from, I'd say, $400 to $600. The difference in cost, for example, the cage we put in the Targa Newfoundland car, that would be about a $5,000 to $6,000 cage. But
Okay.
at the end of the day, it'll save your life. I mean, I've wrecked 3 cars completely, and I've walked away, pretty much unscathed.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Flying Paccioni.
Flying, as seen on YouTube.
Yes,
2000.
just type in Flying Paccioni, you'll get it.
Brakes to me are everything. If anybody who's watched racing, the majority of the overtaking is going to be under braking, not under acceleration, because the cars are pretty evenly prepared. So, in my opinion, and I've made a little statement up here, use the best brakes you can afford, then buy the better one. You can never have enough brakes. Mustangs, the older Mustangs, have a reasonable amount of braking power. They're a bit lacking in the front. So a good upgrade would be a 4-piston, as you can see on the left, or even a 6-piston on the right. These have substantially come down in prices. Now, if you see on the newer Mustangs, this stuff pretty much comes as OEM equipment now. Not the case back in the day, but these things are readily available.
What do these cost to outfit, say, that Fox
Hard
body?
to say. There's so many aftermarket brands. I mean, you could pay $600 for brakes. You could pay $6,000. It all depends on what the application is. For a street application, you don't need the best one, but under race applications, it's going to save your life. You want the best you can buy, or the best you can afford. Suspension. The older Mustangs typically come with a spring and shock setup. This is great, and for some showroom stock racing, you have to stay with this setup. But the disadvantage is you don't have a lot of adjustability. You can't set up the car that much. You're basically limited as to what you can do. With the newer setup, or even an aftermarket setup of a coilover, you have more adjustability. You have adjustability in damping, you have adjustability in ride height, and you have adjustability in spring rate. This makes for a way better handling car, and you can adapt the car to the different track and different conditions that you're driving. Bushings. Bushings are those little rubber donut things that are attaching all the suspension pieces to the car. Factory bushings are typically rubber. They're made for a smoother, more comfortable ride. Not so good on a racetrack. You want to get that road feel, and that requires putting polyurethane bushings in the car. It's going to make the car ride stiffer and harder, but on a racetrack, that's what you want. Anti-roll bar. Typically, on a road race car, bigger is better. I'm not even going to comment about that.
Canadian humor.
There you go. The other problem that has been common with the older Mustangs is the rear axle under load tends to go. You get a side-to-side movement. The newer Mustangs have this. It's called a panhard bar. A panhard bar is a bar that attaches from the chassis to the axle, and it prevents the axle from moving side to side. The newer cars come with this pretty much as a standard feature now. Mistakes people make. The biggest one, in my opinion, is too much power too soon. First thing people want to do, they want to put the biggest, baddest motor in the car, but they don't pay attention to suspension and brakes and everything else. This is typically what happens. When you start driving, going to lapping days or club
Was
events.
that you that did that?
That's not me.
That is for once.
That's
it
not
wasn't
me.
you,
That's
yes.
not me, actually. I should have actually put our picture.
Yeah, you got plenty of those.
I do. The first thing people want to do when they get out to a racetrack, you get that red mist, you want to start racing. You want to put your foot to the floor and go. Absolutely not. It's like anything. You have to walk before you can run. Focus on driving and not racing. The racing will come later. Everybody thinks they know everything, so you typically kind of tune out when the instructor's telling you something. Big mistake, because that'll come and bite you in the rear later on.
He told me this before we started our Targa.
I did.
Yeah, he told me to shut up, listen, I know nothing. I believe that was it.
There you go.
Yeah.
Vision. You need to be aware of your surroundings, especially on a racetrack. You know how it is when you're driving in traffic on the street, people cut you off. Think of it as 10 times worse on a racetrack because you're going at a much greater speed and you have cars around you that are going the same. Whenever you make changes to your car, we forget things. We develop Alzheimer's really quick. You need to keep accurate records. You make a change to a car, you want to see what that change results in. And the next time you go to the track, you're going to forget. Trust me, I do it all the time. You want to keep some sort of logbook or record of the changes you made so you don't make the mistake the same time, or the next time, sorry. In summary, driving is a skill set that's acquired. It requires instruction. It's like, you know, you can buy the best golf clubs in the world, but it doesn't make you a good golfer. It's a skill like any other sport. It needs to be learned. To get started, you need to decide on a skill set, what type of driving you want to do, whether it's drifting, defensive driving, road racing, etc. There are plenty of schools, accredited schools, that will address these. These are some of the schools that I've been to, Bondurant, Skip Barber, and Tim O'Neill Rally School. My opinion, Bondurant is the best one by far that addresses all these concerns.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
So you, actually, this is your mic. What am I saying?
sorry,
I
sorry,
keep on
sorry.
forgetting
You
to
got
have my own mic, yeah.
Typical you want both mics.
Of course. I want it all, man. I want it all. You tried to steal my car. We had two separate rally cars. He tried to take mine as well.
How do you figure?
Well, you tried to take it and campaign it at Mossport, and then you screwed it up somehow, and then it got crushed when it got back to Detroit.
They got crushed because they knew it was your car.
Yeah, likely story.
They didn't want to have any. Heck, the car that I drove is still in the museum.
Hey, I won the Serious Champions Award of that.
Yes, you did.
I did. And hey, actually, you won your class that year.
I did.
Big round of applause. 2011, Targa Newfoundland champion, as well as other years too. You collect. He collects racing awards like other people collect stamps, and not just in Targa, but in ice racing.
Oh, you're too kind. Well, I am Canadian. I am Canadian. Driving every day to work is an ice racing adventure in Canada, especially this year.
You also you didn't just go to those schools. I believe you teach at those schools.
Yeah, I've taught at a few of the schools: Bridgestone Racing School, Porsche Club, Mustang Club, and even Ferrari Club.
So Ferrari Club, look at that.
Yes.
Okay, we've
Every
got.
once in a while,
I don't know if you heard before. We got a big rivalry going on here between the Ford camp and the Ferrari camp.
I'd love to be part of that rivalry.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to switch over to some Q&A now. I'm going to have the lovely Marielle and the somewhat less lovely Adam collect your cards. Before we move on to that, while we're waiting for that, thank you, sir. Once again, big round of applause for Mr. Paccioni, my fellow Targa Newfoundland teammate. And you can see us. We shot a documentary, a 4-part documentary of us literally starting in Michigan with the cars and then all the way to Targa Newfoundland, which our team won. I won't tell you what the team is, though. That we're going to keep a secret. Anyway, please follow us at the show, MotoManTV, and the museum, Petersen Museum. You can also follow our panelists here. Obviously, you can follow Chris with the museum, Petersen Museum. You can follow Dave at DH Kinney on Twitter. You can follow John also on Twitter at Kraman. Interesting thing, this man does not own what?
A personal computer.
A personal computer. Yet he is Mr. Twitter. He's got more followers than most 13-year-old
The magic
girls.
of an iPhone.
I'm not too far away from him.
Yeah. You do have a computer, and you can follow him at Paccioni Motorsport on Facebook. And before we move on to Q&A, I want to give you guys a bit of a heads up of our next show, which is next month, June 21st. We have Cars in Miniature. We're having the design director of Hot Wheels, Felix Holst, to join us here at Inside the MotoMan studio. So make sure you put that on your calendar, June 1st of 2014. And with that, where are our questions? The lovely Marielle. Marielle, we have questions for our panelists here. I know I have questions of the panelists. Why, thank you, Marielle. One more question. Look at this. You guys, man, you guys have a lot of questions. Let's see here. Who do we start with? Oh, look at this. Rob. Rob has a very good question. I'm going to give this one to Dave first. Dave, pricing guides do not account for one-owner cars. What percent factor could I use?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because also price guides don't account for colors, and especially in muscle cars, that can be a big difference. you always have to keep in mind that it's the word guide is the important thing. It's not the gospel, it's a guide. A lot of times we see cars that sell for above a number one car, value. It's really, really hard to say what a one-owner car, the difference it would make in terms of percentage, because it would make a lot bigger difference on a classic Aston Martin than it would on a Mustang, and that's just because of numbers. So there are a lot of 2008 Mustangs that have a number one status, but when you go down in the number of Aston Martins, for example, that have a one-owner status, it's a much smaller number, so it becomes more important. It is a boost, but so are occasionally some options. So it depends on the car is the best answer, but I would always go for a one-owner car if I had a choice between a car with a known ownership history and something that, the gap in ownership, it was bought by so-and-so and then it came to me 15 years later. That's not the good story you want to hear.
Okay. John, would you add to anything to that?
Yeah, I think Dave covered it pretty well. I just want to add one thing in regards to that, and that is when you've got a particular collector car that may be difficult to document, and there are a lot of them out there, the terms matching numbers, original engine, totally original, never been painted, those type of things are very hard to try to document on a car that doesn't have either a known ownership change or even better, one ownership status. We certainly have seen in the auction environment with a one-owner car where the story can really be told, and all of a sudden the car is bona fide as a true thoroughbred, the value of the car raises substantially. Just the fact that it's a one-owner car in itself, depending on the collector car, may or may not mean anything. If it was a one-owner car that was bought new and driven into the ground and is not in particularly good condition, is not going to have an extreme value. So I think you gotta, that we always try to make collector car values into a science, and it's really more of an art. Generally speaking, though, just like Dave said, one-owner car, that's the one the collector's going to go for first. Everything else being equal.
Chris, do you know if we confirmed whether that Mustang 2 we have is a one-owner car or not? It certainly looks like it.
Well, and you can see how that affected the value of it, too.
Yeah, all $2,800 of it. And the story with that was we found one for loan, and I believe the shipping was $4,500?
I think it was 65. Because it ended up kind of late in the day. It took us forever to find it, and it was in, I think, Wisconsin. And it would have cost us.
You could have put it on American.
Wasn't mine, I promise.
And it was actually a collector that had multiple Mustang 2s. Most of them were Cobra 2s or King Cobras. And he had an interesting car, but it turned out that it was difficult to get the car here, and it made more sense for us to just purchase one. And really, for the exhibit, because there are so many cars in that exhibit that are performance oriented, we actually thought that the four-cylinder, four-speed 1974 model told a more interesting part of the story, especially when it's next to that 71, the biggest Mustang with the 429 in it, the biggest motor, and just seeing, what happened when we hit an oil crisis and all of a sudden you could only get a 4 or a 6-cylinder in a Mustang, and the car was much smaller.
Wow. A little bit off topic here, but I want to pose this question first to John, and then I think Dave and you guys can pick it up afterwards. We had dinner last night, and John and I were talking about values of cars, Mustangs, and then we talked about the very high end, cars like we're kind of surrounded here. The question comes from Russell. How comfortable are you guys with higher end auction values? Are they truly reflective of market value? We talked about like the $1 million GT350 or the $600,000 Boss 302, but I think Russell's probably talking more about like $8 million Ferraris.
Yeah, that is a really great question. We hit on that a little bit when we had a little bit of dialogue in regards to the values of the Boss 429, which certainly within the Mustang environment is a car that's very highly sought after and has a lot of value. And enough of those sell, despite the fact that they're high-value cars for Mustangs, enough of them sell to establish a baseline. We start getting into cars like Ferraris, or a particular car that I have a very high passion of, Ford GTs and GT40s of all generations. Then it gets a little bit more tricky, because just because we sold a 1964 Ford GT40 for $7 million this year doesn't necessarily mean that if another one came onto the auction block or came onto the market in a month or two, it would bring that same amount. So I think when you start getting into the lofty heights of high 6- and 7-figure cars, I think that the potential for a lot of fluctuation of value does exist there, as opposed to cars that sell on a more regular basis, and there's more comparables to establish a baseline. Dave, your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I think that you have to think of every single sale, whether an auction sale, a dealer sale, or a private treaty sale, as a singular event. Sometimes the number cannot be duplicated again, or it will take maybe 2 or 3 more sales to get back up to that number. A lot of the times the history of the automobile has something to do with it as well. We all know that the magic name in our business is Steve McQueen. He's like the gold-plated big name. And when you have a car that was owned by somebody who maybe was big in the entertainment industry and a well-known name, but somebody wasn't famous for owning that car or wasn't famous for being a car owner, a lot of the times that has very little effect. And sometimes you get 2 people who just really want to have Justin Bieber's Corvette, sadly. Yeah, exactly. So
Justin who?
I was just trying to think about one of your more outrageous celebrities. So, so think of them all as a one-time event, as we do. We go back to Ronald Reagan with Trust But Verify. A lot of the times we find out that sales get unwound. This happens in the private marketplace, it happens in the auction marketplace, and it happens with dealers. It is an event that is out there and happens. And there is also occasionally market manipulation on cars. The big one from a number of years ago was Duesenberg, J-model Duesenbergs. They were almost all owned by the same small group of people. And when the music stopped and they pulled the chairs out, a lot of people got hurt. So you need to do your own research on these things. And like I said, I'll go back to MotoMan's personal hero, Ronald Reagan, and say, trust but verify.
And with that, we have Ronald Reagan's personal Mustang out there.
We certainly do. That's why I was thinking of
the magic of Hollywood here
the
at
Double
the
R
Petersen
Ranch
Automotive
here.
Museum. Speaking of Hollywood, I guess somewhat, one of the friends of the museum is Parnelli Jones, who was on this show a couple months ago. And we have an interesting question from no name. Someone was anonymous here. What happened with the values of Boss 302s?
Take it.
Yeah, great question. I've got a couple of, I've actually had that question answered several times, and I've got a little bit of a kind of a semi-canned response for it. I think when you start dealing with cars that are as legendary as the Boss 302, built only 2 years in the first production run, 69 and 70, there's a couple things to keep in mind. It was an important car for the time in that it made that body style and that 5-liter engine legal for SCCA sports car racing. It was an era of big engines and big horsepower and big blocks, and that's the bulk of what was driving the performance market in that era. Were not small, high-winding, kind of modest horsepower engines. So we saw, a real steady rise of Boss 302 prices through about 2005, 2006. When the market had its correction, that's a nice word for crash, in 2008, the Boss 302, like every other car, took a pretty good hit in its value. Why hasn't it come back as strong as it should? A couple reasons. Most notably is, since that time period, what's happened out there as far as choices for Ford fans, if they want a car that's got we'll say sort of a retro vibe, the introduction of the S197 platform in 2005 with steadily escalating performance has probably gone a long way to affect the image, I guess, of the Boss 302. It's a great car and it's a good performer, especially if the engine's been mildly tuned to get the exhaust opened up, get some ignition timing in, run some high-octane fuel. I mean, it's a good, fun performer. It's a great street car, and it's a nice track day car as well. But compared to the performance we have with the current generation Mustangs that share that sort of similar vibe, a sub 300 horsepower, rating on a Boss 302 from an image standpoint kind of pales in comparison when a V6 Mustang you can buy today for under $20,000 a 2014 will out-accelerate that car. Wasn't available back in '05 when the prices were real high.
But wouldn't the Trans Am history of this car increase its value?
Yes. For a car that had actually raced in the Trans Am series, if it was an actual documented race car, those cars continue to be, very sought after as, real important cars. But just as a street car, the Boss 302s are kind of lagging maybe a little bit behind the market. Now, all of that's been said, if a Boss 302 surfaces that is in extreme good original condition, or it's a restored car that's still carrying a lot of its originality, particularly with the engine and transmission, that car still has the potential to do $65,000, $70,000, $80,000. Not all of them will reach that kind of price level right now. They're down around the $40,000 to $45,000 price range for kind of a high quality driver. So there's still some opportunity for the Boss 302s out there, but that's a good question, because that's a car that is kind of lagging right now a little bit.
So, okay, bringing in non-Mustang cars, like if you look at the Jaguar market, D-types through the roof, but they drafted E-types. So E-types have gone from, what, a couple like 50 grand, now they're 125 grand.
Big jump.
That drafted Austin Healey's. Does your $600,000 or $300,000 the 429, would that draft one of these things, these 302s?
I guess a different way to put it is, does a rising tide lift all ships? I think that's kind of the concept there. But I think in a more simple term, it all comes down to supply and demand. It's just as simple as that. When you've got X amount of product out there and you've got X amount of buyers, if you've got a bunch of baby boomers that wanted a Boss 302 and they had the money to be able to go out and buy those cars, and all of a sudden the inventory started to dry up about 2004, 2005, the prices really went up. A lot of those cars came back onto the market during the economic crash. There's a pretty fair amount of those cars available right now, and until a new wave of buyer comes back in, I think they're gonna remain a good buy, but I think that they're probably gonna remain fairly stable and flat.
Okay. For our last question, I want each one of you to say yes or no answer to Gary Brown's question. If you had a 1961 Mach 1 351 that's never been repainted.
71.
71. No, it's 69.
71.
He says 69.
Boss 351 was 71 only.
Well, he says Mach 1 351.
What year?
Says 69.
You said a Boss 351.
That
Okay, I'll
dyslexia
tell
will
what,
get you every time,
I will
George.
make this nice and easy for you. Let's say if you had a 1970 Boss 302 that's never been repainted, Gary, you'll have to extrapolate on this one. If I had a 1970 302 that's never been repainted, would you repaint it to increase the value or not repaint it? Yes or no?
I would say no, because it's only original one time.
Dave?
Absolutely no.
John?
We're presuming it's in relatively good condition? We don't know.
Let's assume, yes.
Well, then no, you would leave it original.
Rob?
I could care less for the paint job. I would just want to drive the socks off that car.
And with that, I want to bring up three special guests here before we close out to say hello. Steve Ling from Ford, come on up. Steve Ling from Ford. Adam Martin from Hagerty, come on up, come on up. And a very special guest, Bob Freya, who is a well-known Mustang historian and the owner of Retail Mustang #1. Come on over here, Bob.
Yeah.
Bob Freya, come on here. Bob is also, we've talked about aviation here. Bob is with 30 years you were left seat with United Airlines. So it's a big aviation theme here. Gentlemen, these are the experts here. We've got Hagerty, we've got old Mustangs, and we've got new Mustangs. Any questions while you guys are still here? Come and see Steve, Adam, Bob, or any one of the panelists here. At this point, we're going to say goodbye to our streamed audience. Thank you for joining us for Mustang Madness for our 3 shows. We had a good time with Vaughn, didn't we?
Fantastic.
Thank you very much for coming out from Michigan.